Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 264. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the world-renowned and talented art director, designer, and illustrator, Kevin Maher. Kevin.
Hi.
How's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So this has been a fun interview so far. We actually just started officially the interview, but we've been bantering for a good 15 minutes beforehand. So I'm excited. You've been working for many, many years on doing logo design, graphic design, and you just recently came out with your very first comic book called Toxic Man, correct? So talk to us a little bit about Toxic Man. So this is available now as of this recording.
Yes.
Global Comics. You can also get it through Amazon as well.
Yep. And on my own site, you can buy a digital copy. It's digital right now. Eventually, I'm going to get to print. I haven't gotten there
yet.
Okay.
Perfect. So talk to us a little bit about Toxic Man. I'm really excited to have our listeners and viewers read this book.
I've been bopping around the fringes of the comic book industry for a while doing logos, and when I went to school, I always wanted to be a comic book artist. That was my goal. I did all the talent searches. I did all the, go to the convention, show the portfolio. Never seemed to land or work out. So I just said, I got to a point at COVID happened, and I got to a point, I'm like, I'm just going to do it now. I have all this time. I'm inside. So I'm just gonna make my own comic. I'm done. I'm done waiting for someone to hire me to draw Spider-Man or whatever. I'm just gonna make my characters. So Toxic Man, I actually had created when I was in high school. I still have like the original design. Now he's more of a funny character. When I created him in high school, it was like super serious and whatnot. But as I get older, I enjoy more humorous, funny things. So Toxic Man is a washed-up, middle-aged superhero. He's out of shape. He drinks too much, and he's still trying to latch on to his glory days. And his sidekick gets killed. In the first few, that's what happens. His sidekick gets killed, and the whole book is about him dealing with it and going on this wacky adventure because all of a sudden villains start coming after him for no reason. So it's a humorous thing. There's a lot of parody in it and a lot of making fun of other superheroes and things like that. But it's basically just, this funny comic about this just middle-aged guy. It's just like the time has passed. He doesn't have the six-pack abs anymore like all the other superheroes. He's got kind of a beer gut. He drinks too damn much, and it's like, what do I do now? It's like what he goes on this journey to try to come to terms with everything. So in a humorous way. It's not too serious.
So talk to us a little bit about just his the character's origin story then. How did he get his powers?
So he was an office worker, just the regular everyday, just like the rest of us, commutes to work, etc. Boring, making copies in an office, but he worked in this government, not a government thing. It's like this energy plant. So it's probably subsidized by the government. I never came up with that part yet. So he doesn't know what's going on. He's making copies or doing whatever he's doing. He probably works in an office or marketing or something. And there's an accident and the whole energy plant explodes. And he is the only survivor. He comes out of it and he is emitting all these toxic gases, in his he just can't control it. He's doesn't know what to do. He has no idea what's happening. So, but in America, what would happen if we did that is what he did. He sued the company. So he sued for damages, and he never had to work another day in his life. So he got a big settlement because he was the only one who lived, and now he's polluted with weird toxic gases that emit from his body. So he sued. And then he decided one day while celebrating after his victory in the lawsuit that he saw a superhero on the TV, because this is a universe where superheroes exist. He saw another hero and he decided, well, that's what I'm going to do now. I'm just going to be a superhero because
Right.
I can afford to do whatever. And that's just what I'm going to do. So he became really popular. He got like a superhero girlfriend. He got a sidekick. And, and then over time, fame is fleeting. It's like Hollywood here. He's at the Comic Cons, trying to sell his autograph for like $1, and no one wants to stand in his line. And we've all been to those Comic Cons where we've seen people and like that's sad. So
Right.
that was him. So yeah, he just fell deeper and deeper down a hole. He lost his girlfriend. He still tried to pretend to be a superhero, but he just was too busy drinking and feeling bad for himself.
Right. Yeah. Now, is this going to be like an ongoing series, or is this kind of a one shot?
Right now I do have two other. I wanted to make it so it was self-contained.
Right.
I get frustrated when I buy comics, obviously, like a lot of people. I hate waiting for the next issue. A lot of people buy graphic novels now, and a lot of people, especially independent comics, it takes so long from one issue to come out to the next because independent creators have so much on their plate. They have day jobs, they have so much to do. So it takes a while for the second issue to come out. And it could be like 6 months, to a year. So I wanted to make mine self-contained. So you can read this, you can go away and never hear about it again. If you like it, you didn't like it, whatever. But I also want to make more issues that are all self-contained. So every issue I think I'm going to do will be a self-contained story. And then eventually I'll collect them all and, do that. That's my whole future plan. I'm sure it won't work out like that at all, but that's my plan. I have two more ideas I have a sequel and the trilogy planned out in my head.
So with your ideas, does it focus around Toxic Man or some tertiary characters for some of your other stories?
Mostly for this specific one, it's him and his little gang of misfits, basically.
Okay.
A lot of I love creating characters, so there's a lot of random villains, a lot of random people, but there's like a core group that's in the book they'll be the ones that will reoccur. So for this, and then I have a million other ideas for like 8 billion other comics that I haven't even gotten on paper yet. So, which are all new characters and all kinds of stuff.
So let me ask you, because you're a full-time creative. So how do you save some of that energy to do some of your passion work?
Well, most of my day jobs are. A lot of it is, it's not like my passion, it's what the CEO wants or what a manager wants, or, a lot of it is like, I do a lot of like lately UX design. So I'm like doing buttons and things like that. So to me, that stuff it's creative, but it's not my passion to do that. Like my passion is to draw and do illustration and draw comic books. That's what I love to do. So it's a separate thing. When I get home, the thing is I get off the computer. That's the first step, because all my work is done on obviously a Mac, and that's what I do all day. When I get home, I draw traditionally. That whole comic was drawn traditionally. So wow. I don't, and I inked it traditionally, with pens, not with the brush, but I colored it in Photoshop. But everything I do like that was done the way I was taught, the way I learned in school. That's what I like to do. I like to draw traditionally. So wow, it takes a lot longer. and there are people out there that can blow me out of the water with some of their Procreate stuff, and they can just knock out comic book pages in a minute, but I would prefer to do it just like that. So it gets me excited to be like, oh, I get to draw tonight. So instead of working on the computer for another 4 hours. So that's how I usually keep it like the creative energy flowing for that.
So when you put this together, do you script it out, or what's the process?
Well, there was a learning curve for the first book, obviously. I had a rough script written out. Not really the greatest writer on the planet. I'm mostly an artist. So I wrote a rough script. and I did it kind of the Marvel way, where the old Marvel way, where you kind of like made the panels and you're like, this is kind of what's going to happen here. And I have an idea. This is kind of what they're going to say. And I drew the panel and then I kept going. And then at the end, when I was doing the lettering, I was actually writing a lot of the dialogue at the end because it was like plugging in some stuff because I hadn't fully fleshed it out. So it worked for me.
Right. And so because what you, as you're talking about here, this kind of has a different and unique style to what you do in your day job as well.
Yeah. I do a few things in my day job.
Right.
But yeah, I do a lot of vector assets in my day job too. And that has a specific style and everything that I need to adhere to. So this, I had done web comics in the past, tried to like launch a whole web comic and did all that for like 5 years. That went nowhere. So I kind of combined like the whole superhero, like the serious superhero stuff with my cartoony style, and I merged it, and it kind of ended up what this book is.
Right. So talk to us also a little bit about, also just to kind of give the listeners and the listeners and the viewers a little bit of background as well, is that as a professional designer, how has being a professional designer help you in the layout of comic books?
Actually, that was the easiest part for comics, because I am so used to laying out magazines and brochures and things. So to me, I wanted to, well, for my first comic, I didn't do any crazy layout stuff. I wanted to get the comic out and down and like, this is how it should be, like like classic things. But as time goes on, I want to experiment more with different kinds of layouts and different kinds of things, because I'm so used to doing crazy kind of brochures and magazines and being creative on what things need to fit where and you know, make everything legible and everything readable. So that part was actually simple, laying out the comic and all the production work, like the pre-production work for the printer, like when I get to the printer part. But even just for the digital side, getting it uploaded to, you know, Kindle and Global and all that stuff, that was actually the part I was very experienced with, and I didn't have a problem. The writing and the lettering and some of the other stuff was like, oh, there's a lot of rules here I didn't know.
So talk to us about that. What were some of the rules and things that you learned that you thought you already knew before you made the comic that you had to learn?
Lettering specifically. Now,
okay,
as a graphic designer, I'm thinking I could jump right in, but it's not as easy as people think. There's a lot of little like rules about typography and stuff in the lettering, like certain dashes, certain quotes, certain ways to present the people talking that I was not aware of. And I actually read that the Nate Pichio's lettering book. It really, really helped. It really like showed me a lot of stuff that I didn't even know. So, and as a designer, I was shocked I didn't know it. I'm like, oh, because I never really deal with conversation in graphic design pieces for companies. Like I don't deal with people talking most of the time. It's mostly like logos and marketing words and you know, pricing and things like that. And there's a lot of little nuances that you don't know. And I did get a couple compliments on the lettering, because somebody had said to me in the past that like, if the lettering's bad, you notice. If the lettering's good, you don't notice, and then that means it's good. So somebody said, this is your first comic and the lettering was really good, and I didn't notice it at all. So it was a good compliment to me. I was like, fantastic.
That's true, because like some of the things are like, for instance, having the space between the word bubble edge and then where the words are placed. There has to be a certain space in there as well.
Yeah, I fudged some, but I tried to keep it like, you know, as best as I could.
So as you said, you did. So for instance, when we're, you know, for our listeners out there, we're looking at pages, I believe, 2 and 3 of your comic.
I think so, yeah.
And I'm sorry, pages 5 and 6. Pages 5 and 6 of your comic. Do you know that? Were these on? Because you said you actually like hand drew them out and everything. So were these actually on the traditional comic book page
It,
paper?
it wasn't on the traditional paper. It was just on regular paper.
Okay.
I just, it wasn't as necessary because I knew I was going to scan it and color it in Photoshop. So it wasn't that. I like some of the panels, like I messed up and I had to like go back and like redraw a panel on another page and like rescan it, throw it in there and things like that.
Okay.
It was a lot of learning. But most of it was, it was a lot of it when I got to the inking portion. So I drew it on like regular paper. I scanned it, I printed it out, so and I inked it on Bristol board. And then I went from there, like obviously mishmash some panels here and there, but most of it was very, very traditional.
Right. No, do you have we were talking before we went on the air about, like the Gen X generation, where we were kind of like being really close to like, the comics of the 80s and early 90s. Do you have already like a world building aspect to this world you're creating in Toxic Man? Like, do you know who some back, super villains and heroes are with like their powers and all that stuff as well?
For the most part, I keep a folder file of just all kinds of random superheroes I've created, or heroes or villains or characters. Some don't even have stories yet. And I have a basic idea of where people relate to who and what things are. Everything in this book, most of this world will just be centered in Carbon City, which is where he lives. And it's kind of like the Gotham, like it's like a made up city. So they don't go outside of it too much. When they do, it would probably be a big deal. So, but yeah, that's like my little world building kind of like thing. So, so
who's Toxic Man's like arch nemesis? Who's his major villain then?
Well, that's a secret in the book. So
it's a secret. Okay.
It's a reveal in the book that ends up being his nemesis. So you'll see it if you read it. Yeah, I don't want to spoil it.
Okay, so it's opened up in issue 1. Talks about that then, right?
Yes. Once you get through like almost near the end of the book, big reveal happens, and you're like, oh. So, and that's that person will be his nemesis, probably main nemesis going forward. I have a ton of other ideas for villains though. So
when you mentioned like some other books that you're be coming up with, are they specific around Toxic Man, or are they around other superheroes?
Some other ideas I have. No, well, if I just do Toxic Man, it's just him and this gang. But other books I have will be. I've had some ideas. I like a lot of different art styles, and I want to try some different art in different books. So, like, I have some horror comic ideas, and I want to try like a different art style for those books. When I get to it, who knows when that will be. And then I had like some more cartoony style, like really more animated stuff, like kind of like the web comics I used to do. They're more like newspaper-esque strips kind of stuff. And yeah, that's what I have planned out so far. This is a lot. I haven't got too far. I have some parodies that are other parody things I kind of want to flesh out a little more that I've thought about. But again, I want them all to be different art styles. So that's where I want to do as many weird things as possible, and then maybe one will hit and I'll become the Walking Dead guy. But you never hit with the first thing the first few times. I mean, it'd be shocking if this, like, I kept releasing books and it became pretty popular. I'd be pretty happy, but usually it takes a few tries.
And what do you like most about the process? The actual drawing it out, or the actual scripting it out?
I like the drawing over everything. The scripting I find a little tedious. The coloring I find a little tedious because it's like you got to sit on the computer again for more time. But I would prefer just to draw it. I like, my second favorite part is creating characters. I just like drawing weird things, like weird characters. I'm like, oh, this guy could fit here, or this girl could fit there, and just designing costumes and things like that. It's the best part of comics to me. Even when I used to play a lot of video games, every video game I used to play, if it had a character creator mode, I would spend more time making my own character than actually playing the game.
Right.
So that's just what I love to do.
Right. And so, you know, with that said, would you ever be looking at having like writers? Because you said you've been in the industry long enough to know like different writers and illustrators and stuff. Would you think about, because you have all these stories to tell, like, you know, created by Kevin Maher, written by so and so, illustrated by Kevin Maher? Would that be something you would want to do as well?
I think it matters which comic I do.
Right.
If it's a comic I'm not so like attached to, and I just came up with the idea, I'm like, I need a writer for this plot. This is a great idea, but I don't know how to really write it and make it intriguing. Right. I would absolutely do that. I think right. Toxic Man himself, that's all mine. I don't.
That's yours.
I don't think I would let anybody touch that. That's just, it's been so, I've had them in my folder for so long. I've had some of the other characters in there for so long. They're mine. And I don't want to let anybody else play in the sandbox unless I'm making a lot of money doing it.
And so, putting together a comic book, actually page layout by page layout, how important is that you've learned, how important is when you look at both pages laid out together like this, like your opposite pages looking at each other? How important is that for the reader to kind of follow along?
Well, that was actually another learning experience in making the first comic. I had sent my comic out to this was originally made to just be digital.
Okay.
And so I didn't want any full page, 2-page spreads. I wanted, if somebody reads it on an iPad, they can just go page by page, because, you know, I'm used to digital comics. I read a lot of digital comics. So, and I'm like, that's perfect. There'll be splash pages, but I don't want the full fold out thing, because on an iPad, sometimes you don't see it right. Things get small. Right. I just didn't like it. So I made sure there was no double page super spreads like that. So a lot of the times, like in the book, like the 2-page spread, looking at it like that, there's no rhyme or reason to some of the design choices on it. So when I actually let my friend Erica Schultz, who I do a lot of her logos, the writer, I had her like look through it and before I released it, and she's like, what happens when you send it to print? I go, what are you talking about? She's like, it's in the corner of the book, there's all these like this little beer can pile, and it gets bigger and bigger as the book goes. And she's like, if you print that, the beer can's going to be in the middle of the page. And I was like, I didn't even think of that. That's something I had no idea that was going to happen, because I was just planning it to be digital. And it's just a funny thing that, like, when you make your own comic, like these little things, if you don't do it a lot, you just don't think about them. It's weird. I mean, though I think I got it to a point where it's visible if I want to get it to print, so it's not going to be a problem. So, but because I had to go back and I think I adjusted it a little to eventually send it out to print.
Right. Well, I mean, that's a good point that you're making, Kevin, because normally what it is people think about, when it comes to making comics, that there's two things. There's the artist, and then there's the writer. But there's but you know, stereotypically speaking, but graphic design is a huge aspect of making comics, because as you say, you want the reader to kind of follow that Z formation of, like, you know, going left to right, because it needs to read like a book, but also it has to have a visual presence to it that you want to look at the entire page and actually see it as a image in a sense as well.
And there's a lot of panels and art that, like, I had to draw it so it looks like it flows, like even like somebody's shoulder cuts off hair and it goes over to the next page. Like, it's just stuff like that I was cognizant of, but some people might not be, because I've just done it with other stuff so often. So but I have a greater appreciation for letterers and colorists now than I ever had before. So I'll say that, like, that is two parts of the comic book that people don't think about a lot, and I think they're so much more important than I was like, when I did the coloring, I was like, my God, I need to hire a colorist.
Have you ever, so when you look at other comics, as you say, when you're looking through some of this stuff, with your graphic design hat on, what are some of the mistakes you see comic creators make from a graphic design perspective when you look at a page that you said, man, obviously you should have talked to a graphic designer before this went to print? What are some of those things that you notice?
It's mostly the lettering and the sound effects. I sometimes sound effects, they are jammed in there when there's no room for them. Like, I had planned out my sound effects ahead of time, and I had the opportunity to do that because I was both drawing and lettering it. So some people don't get to do that, but I have seen sound effects that don't, they look very out of place. They're off the page, like they're hanging off the page when nothing else hangs off the page. I've actually seen and again, that lettering thing, some letters, the balloons are weird, or they just don't look right, and it throws off the whole book. They use a different font and it just changes everything. So, but yeah, I think those are the two biggest things that I see. Oh, and also, who's speaking. A lot of times, especially like, because I have a lot of captions in my book, but and I learned that from Marvel and a bunch of other places, to put the little symbol of the person who's like, so when Toxic Man talks, you see the little toxic biohazard symbol in the corner, and the thing is blue, so you know it's him. And Deadpool does all that with all of his books, and sometimes it gets confusing in newly people when they're first starting out, I think. But in some of the other books I've read, not many. I think a lot of people are smart enough to hire letterers at this point.
And so a lot of people, can you tell the difference when somebody actually uses digital lettering as opposed to actual handwriting lettering?
No, I think it's all digital now. Yeah, I mean, mine's digital, so lettering, but yeah. I can tell in the art a lot, though, like when somebody hand draws something and when somebody does it digitally, but it's getting harder and harder to tell. I've seen stuff that I'm like, I thought it was a painting, like an acrylic painting, and it's not.
Really?
So I've been fooled a few times, and there are things that I thought were like totally digital, and that weren't. It's just I think people's talent is getting so much, it's crossing lines, and I think people's talent is just so vast. So
how has graphic design evolved since you started doing this?
Well, when I first started, I was making newspaper ads. That's how long ago I started. I was putting things, big old headlines, and black and white images, and I mean, design has gotten so it got I felt like very complicated at the beginning. Like once newspapers and things, like there was a certain style you had to do for newspapers and things like that. And then people stopped really reading newspapers, stopped using newspapers, and things kind of got creative, complicated. You could do all kinds of crazy stuff for magazines, online, and things like that. And now I see a trend where everything seems to get simpler and simpler and simpler, which I don't like. Like, you see all these logos that of all these companies that they had like these elaborate, nice, sometimes really nice logos, and they simplified it. Now it's Helvetica, or it's just Futura font, and it's like, we unveiled a new logo, and I'm like, that looks like just somebody typed it in Word. There's no difference. Like, you had like a nice mark, and like it had a symbol and all that stuff. So I think it's gotten to the point. I think that's the whole, and this is just personal opinion, I think the whole like Mac like aesthetic and everything has pushed, and like even Squarespace and all that stuff has pushed everything towards this like clean, sleek design, and I don't think it's very interesting.
Right.
So I've seen like 3 levels of design go through, I think now. And I mean, who knows what'll happen in the next 20 years.
But it's like you bring up a good point though. When design is very, very similar to say fashion or
Oh
some
yeah.
where it's like there's a seasonal thing to it where it evolves to the point where if you're making a comic book, you're going to make a comic book with word bubbles. Like
Right.
it's pretty standard on. I mean, you can be creative with it but design, you have to keep up with
It's
trends.
kind of a pain.
Yeah.
It's like keeping up with the programs. It's like I
Right.
constantly have to learn. I constantly have to see what's being used because there are fonts that were cool back then that you do not touch now. Like you just
Right.
don't do it because they look like they're from the 70s or the 80s or whatever, because they were everywhere back then. And now you can't use them because you date your company, you date your customer or whatever. And it's just, it is like that. It does get tiresome after a while. Sometimes I think, oh, I wish I was an accountant because math doesn't change. Like math is math. Like it's not gonna 2 + 2 is not gonna change ever. I don't have to worry about that. But yeah, it does
Right.
get frustrating. Me and my wife have that conversation constantly because she's a photographer and a videographer, and it's constantly relearning programs and this is the new thing. This is the new way to do it. This is the new. So it is like fashion, and it moves faster as you get older.
Right. Is this the reason why you see as you're drawing pencil to paper on your comic book as a level of therapy because it's separated from your digital graphic design world as well?
I absolutely believe that. It definitely it's just pencil on paper is always the same. And you know, I like to draw on pastel sometimes. I like to paint watercolor too. Like those things haven't changed for thousands of years. You know, yeah, new paints come out and stuff, but the techniques are quite similar still. Like the same techniques I learned how to paint in college are still relevant today. Like you still paint that way with acrylics. So it really is like, it gives me that like homey feeling.
Right. And so what advice would you give to someone that might be interested in getting into graphic design?
Oof, that's a loaded question. It's very difficult right now. I'll be honest. Like there are people coming out and just they're saying AI is going to get rid of your jobs and all this stuff. And like, but I think the future of a lot of graphic design, like the people who make the most money and have a really successful career, from what I've seen, they do a lot of motion design. That's really good. It's really hard. From what my own experience, I do a tiny bit, and it's I find it difficult. I would go in that direction or go towards the UX design. I see constant jobs for like web backend stuff, but they need someone to make it look good. So if you can like design like a website of some kind, or design the way an app looks or a website looks, or you know, mostly apps, actually that's probably a better direction to go in, is apps. If you can design the way an app looks and make it look nice, and they can always hire someone to code it, those because they can't make it look good. I work with web developers. They do not grasp those nuances. And if you can make it look good, companies want you. So I think anything in that world, like apps and motion design, I feel like are like big futures. I thought like web design would be like back like 10 years ago, like everybody's just doing this, everybody's doing Dreamweaver, everybody's doing whatever. It's probably more than 10 years ago actually. But now Squarespace and Wix, everybody just signs up, builds their own site, and they're done. Like nobody has a need for you. You can still charge, but the build it for them, but you're going to get more a lucrative career from like, say, like ESPN asking you to do animation graphics for SportsCenter. Like that's just it's like a Coca-Cola is going to be like, oh, we need you to animate this stuff in 3D and things like that. Like those areas in my mind are the future, because the basic stuff has been automated and it sucks for people like me.
I had a previous guest on, and I asked her the same question about what you mentioned about AI. And she said something that was pretty poignant. She says, AI can only make good things. There is plenty of that. There's only a finite room for good work, but there's plenty of room for great work. And AI can never make great work. It can only make good work.
I've been playing around with some of the AI stuff, the chat and all that things.
Yeah.
And it's some of the low level stuff. It's going to wipe it out, but you can't get that thing to write my comic. You can't, because I'm so ridiculous up here that I put like random characters in the book that really have no place. And an AI is not going to do that. It's going to be like, I don't, why would you put that there? It doesn't make sense. The ludicrous part of art will never be replaced by AI. And that's one good thing. That's why I like art. And I think all those kind of movements like Dada and all that stuff eventually will come back in the future because they're ridiculous.
So I'm most curious about when you're doing your character creation. What is this one? Give us an example of one character besides Toxic Man, because that's one's really fun. What is one character creation that you're sitting there with your pencil and your paper that you wrote out maybe this year, last year, 10 years ago, that you're like, I can't wait for people to find this person. What is that one thing that kind of fits within that Kevin Maher-esque like work?
Oh man, there's so many in my folder that I haven't. Actually, one of the characters in Toxic Man was one of the villains was that guy. I had drawn him many years ago, and he's this fat guy, and he's called the American Dream, and he's this fat guy, and he's got all cameras around him, like he's like a he wants to be famous. Well, he is famous. And my friend saw him and said that was the most American thing he ever saw, and it was the most hilarious thing he ever saw. And he's like, this fat guy just obsessed with himself. Like, he's like, this is perfect. You got to put this in a book. So that's why that character's in the book. He's not in it for long, but he's in there. That's one of the characters that I was happy to get out. Like, I was like, this is one of my favorites, and I wanted to get him out of the. But outside of that, I've thrown a lot of characters out there. When I was doing web comics, I had like a whole group of friends, like it's kind of like Charlie Brown-esque, and some of the adults were like ridiculous, like little old men, and like they were just cranky and stuff. And I thought those are great, and they just never really went anywhere. I like cranky old men characters. I got a lot of those.
No, so if people want to learn more about your work, Kevin, where's the best place they could go to?
They could go to my website. It's kevinmaherdesign.com. It has basically all my design portfolio, my illustration portfolio, and all the logos I've done for other books that are in print. Actually, one just got funded on Kickstarter by Erica Schultz. Christabel, I did that logo.
Nice.
That just got funded today or yesterday. I think it just hit its goal, so that should be coming out in the future. So you can see, and it also has other comic samples, other illustration. I do a lot of G.I. Joe and like fan art, stuff like that, because I love G.I. Joe, I love Transformers, I love all that stuff. So I try to experiment with like watercolor and things like that. So you can see all of that. And then there's like my commissions and rate sheet. You can see if you ever need to hire me for anything, or I have all the things on there. So everything is there. So that's my main hub. And outside of that, I'm usually on Twitter at KM Comics and Toys. That's also my Instagram handle. But those are the two social media ones I bop around.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, this has been great, Kevin. Come back on when you have your next book coming out.
Oh, sure, definitely. Whenever I come up, when I have a next project, I'll definitely email.
Yeah. Awesome.
I'm like obsessed with Skeletor, so I have a bunch of Skeletors.
I love. How did we go from being kids, like,
I don't know.
being Gen Xers, where we were just like, "That is the bad guy," to the point where, like, we, like, for some reason, we're
Yep.
nostalgic over, like, the cartoonish villains of, like, the 80s. It's
Because they
like,
were serious, and it's like
yeah,
so like the cartoonish villains that are real life today are so much worse than
right,
like Skeletor yelling and calling people buffoons. It's just
yeah.
ridiculous. But I